so get this. We're diving deep today into a legal battle, and it's a big one. It's making waves across India's whole energy sector. We're talking accusations of gas theft, a huge corporation, and billions of dollars are at stake here.
Yeah, and what's interesting about this is it goes beyond just, he said, she said. This case raises questions about how a country manages resources. It touches on the role of big corporations and even India's drive to become energy independent.
You wouldn't believe this. The company, Reliance Industries, they're accused of essentially drilling sideways to get their neighbor's gas. It's like a heist movie or something.
It really is. To understand this whole thing, we need to picture the scene. So off the coast of eastern India, you have the Krishna-Godavari Basin, the KG Basin. It's this massive underwater reservoir of natural gas.
And this is where our main players are.
Exactly. So you've got Reliance Industries, or RIL. They're headed by this billionaire, Mukesh Ambani. And on the other side, you have this state-owned company, the Oil and Natural Gas Corporation, or ONGC.
So it's a private company going up against, like, a government-backed one, both going after the same resources, huh?
Have you ever seen this kind of dynamic play out before? I mean, in other countries that have these really valuable resources.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's like this classic power struggle. You see it a lot when you have these private interests. And then you've got, like, national agendas, and they're kind of bumping into each other. And this happens especially in sectors like energy.
Okay, so walk us through it. What exactly is ONGC claiming that RIL did?
So ONGC is alleging that between 2009 and 2013, RIL was drilling wells. And these wells were really close to the boundaries of their areas in the KG Basin. So the accusation is they basically let gas migrate from ONGC's reserves over into their own blocks.
So they're saying that RIL siphoned off gas that didn't even belong to them.
That's what they're claiming. And get this, the Delhi High Court actually sided with ONGC on this. They overturned this previous international arbitration ruling, a ruling that had actually favored RIL.
Wow, a complete reversal. What made the court change their mind like that? Well, the court didn't hold back at all. They accused RIL of insidious fraud and unjust enrichment, and they hit them with a penalty of $1.729 billion.
That's a huge statement from the court. It seems like they're really trying to send a message about how corporations should behave, especially when it comes to these national resources.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. This ruling has been like a shockwave. I mean, through India's corporate world, really. It shows that the government's willing to step in and protect what they see as these national interests, even if it means going up against these powerful companies like RIL.
So how does this case show us how RIL operates? Like, what's their strategy here?
Well, to understand that, we have to look at a crucial piece of evidence. There's this report from 2014. It's from this U.S. consultancy firm. It's called DeGolyer and McNaughton, or D&M.
Okay, so what did this report find? What was so important about it?
The report basically indicated that RIL might have extracted gas from ONGC's fields, and they might have done it without authorization. And this became like the foundation for ONGC's accusations and for the government's whole case against RIL.
So the Indian government saw this report, and then they decided to demand that RIL pay up, right?
Exactly. So they hit RIL with a bill for $1.47 billion. They said it was for siphoning gas from these two specific ONGC blocks.
But RIL didn't just say, okay, we'll pay it, right? How did they defend themselves against all this?
Well, RIL has always said
Yeah.
that they were operating within the rules of their contract, like their production sharing contract. It's this complicated agreement that outlines how they divide up the resources they extract. And they've also said that it wasn't even possible to do joint development of the fields because, RIL and ONGC were at totally different stages of exploration.
It's classic back and forth, isn't it? RIL says they followed the rules, and the government says, not so fast. We've got evidence.
Yeah, exactly. And this whole thing led to, years of legal battles, arbitration attempts, court cases, the whole 9 yards. And then finally, it culminated in this Delhi High Court ruling.
And things really escalated in May of 2023, didn't they?
Oh, they did. The Modi government really doubled down. They argued that the earlier arbitration ruling in favor of RIL, they said it was against public policy, and they accused RIL of unjust enrichment through what they called fraudulent means.
So it wasn't just about RIL and ONGC. It was about the government sending a message to other corporations working in India. This case has implications beyond just this one dispute. It's a statement about how India manages and protects its natural resources.
Yeah, it's a big deal for sure. It makes you think, though, this verdict, it's not just about RIL and ONGC, is it? What are the wider effects, on India's energy sector?
It goes way beyond those two, yeah. Think about it. India really wants to be energy independent by 2047, and this ruling could be a signal to foreign investors. It shows how serious the government is about their resources.
So could this impact investment in the whole sector then? Oh, absolutely. Some investors might hesitate, especially if they think the government is getting too involved. But then again, it might attract investors who like transparency and a level playing field.
So it's kind of a double-edged sword. It reminds me of other countries that have these challenges. Have you seen other governments do this? Like taking on big corporations, especially when there are lots of resources at stake?
Yeah, definitely. Resource nationalism is becoming more common. Governments want more control over their natural wealth. It's a trend. And this case could really embolden other nations to follow suit.
Like a domino effect.
Exactly. This case could set a precedent, not just in India, but internationally. It shows that tension between what corporations want and what countries need, especially for resources that are important for growth and security.
But let's look at the other side for a second. Did REL have any good points in their defense?
That's a good question, and it's important to consider that. REL has always maintained that they were following their contract. And they say that the KG Basin is really complex geologically, so it's hard to know exactly where the gas came from.
So it's more complicated than just stealing gas, then?
Exactly. The court understood that it was complicated, but they still ruled that there was enough evidence of unjust enrichment, and that's why they issued that penalty.
It makes you think about how hard it is to extract these resources. Like, you can't just draw lines on a map when you're dealing with underground reservoirs.
Absolutely. This case shows how tricky it is to manage shared resources, especially when they're underground. How do you ensure that everyone gets their fair share? And how do you even define who owns what when you're talking about something like gas?
It's like two families trying to share a swimming pool, but the water's always moving back and forth.
That's a grim way to put it. It shows how hard it is to define ownership and how to prevent exploitation.
So how will this ruling affect future energy deals in India? Do you think we'll see stricter contracts?
It's definitely possible.
Yeah.
The government might start rewriting those production sharing contracts. They'll want to make things clearer and avoid these kinds of disputes. They might even introduce better ways to monitor things, to make sure everything is transparent and accountable.
Like a wake-up call for the whole sector.
Exactly. This could lead to big changes in how energy is managed and regulated in India.
We know that RIL can appeal this decision. So if this goes to the Supreme Court, what should we be looking for?
There are a few key things. First, how will RIL's lawyers present their case? Will they focus on the details of the contract? Or will they try to challenge the court's definition of unjust enrichment?
It's going to be interesting to see how it plays out.
And then how will the Supreme Court weigh the evidence? Will they agree with the High Court? Or will they see things differently?
Their decision will have a big impact. It could set a precedent for future cases.
Absolutely. And finally, we have to think about the long-term effects. What will this mean for India's energy sector? Will it encourage investment or discourage it? And how will it shape future energy policies?
There are a lot of potential consequences.
It's like a chess game. Every move changes the whole board.
And it's not just about the law, is it? There's a moral side to all of this, too.
Absolutely. This case goes beyond the legal stuff. It's about fairness. It's about accountability. It's about using resources ethically. Resources that belong to the whole nation.
It makes you think about who benefits from these resources and who pays the price.
It's a tough question with no easy answers. But this case shows us that corporations have to be responsible, and governments have to protect their citizens, especially when it comes to essential things like energy.
It shows how important it is to have these discussions and to think critically about these complex issues.
Absolutely. We have to look beyond the headlines and understand all the different sides, the consequences, and the long-term impact.
We can't just take everything we hear at face value, right? We have to dig deeper, ask questions, and think about what all this means in the bigger picture.
And that's exactly what we try to do here. Give you the information and the insights so you can make up your own mind.
Exactly. We want to help you think critically, to challenge what you hear, and to have these conversations about these really complicated topics.
These issues affect everyone. The things that happen in courtrooms and boardrooms, they have a ripple effect. They impact way more people than just the ones involved.
So we're wrapping up our deep dive now, this whole Reliance Industries and the KG Basin gas dispute. What's the main thing you want our listeners to think about?
I think this case is bigger than just the legal battle itself. It really highlights this fundamental question. How do we balance economic progress with protecting our resources? And how do we make sure corporations are held accountable in a way that benefits everyone, not just a few?
That's a question with no easy answers.
It requires us to think about the needs of today, but also the needs of future generations.
It requires ongoing dialogue. We need to analyze things critically and be willing to challenge the status quo.
It's about recognizing that the choices we make today will shape the world we live in tomorrow.
It's a small piece of a much larger conversation happening globally. It makes us think about how we produce energy, about the power of corporations, and about how we take care of our planet's resources.
And this conversation is only going to become more important as the demand for resources grows and the effects of climate change become more and more obvious.
So as we wrap things up, here's something for you to consider. If you were advising the Indian government, how would you balance the need for energy with ethical resource management? What compromises would you be willing to make? What are your non-negotiables?
Those are the questions you should all be asking. The future of our planet really does depend on the choices we make, both individually and as a society.
Well said. This deep dive has been a journey. We've explored a complex issue with big consequences. It reminds us that learning is a continuous process. There's always more to discover, to question, and understand. Keep diving deep, everyone.